I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I didn't warn him. I just changed the code. The message came in late Thursday afternoon, the kind that assumes the answer before you've even read it. My friends and I are using your lake house this weekend. Don't be weird about it. No question mark, no pause, no apology for the way he'd left my apartment the week before, like a crime scene no one planned to clean up. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone in one hand, the other pressed flat against the counter. The smell of stale alcohol still lingered. Red wine stains I hadn't been able to scrub out yet. A cracked lampshade. A door frame that no longer closed properly because someone, his friends, had slammed it hard enough to splinter the lock. He'd shrugged when I confronted him back then. Relax, he'd said, it was just a weekend. And now, apparently, he'd decided he deserved another one. I stared at the message longer than I needed to. Not because I was unsure, because something inside me finally settled. That quiet, dangerous calm that shows up when you stop negotiating with reality. I typed back 2 words. Have fun. Then I opened my contacts and called the property management company. The lake house was never technically mine. It belonged to my uncle, managed through a company that handled bookings, access codes, security. Codes weren't universal. They were personal, account-based, revocable. I told them, calmly, that someone I no longer trusted had access tied to my account, and for safety reasons, his entry code needed to be deactivated immediately. They didn't hesitate. New code issued, old code canceled. A note added to the file. No guests authorized under his name this weekend. I hung up and went back to my evening. Friday night, my phone started vibrating around 6. Once, twice, then nonstop. Missed calls, unknown numbers. Text stacking so fast the screen couldn't keep up. The gate won't open. This isn't funny. We drove 2 hours. There's no service out here. You need to fix this. I didn't respond. Later, much later, I would see the footage. His SUV pulled up to the gate. Coolers in the back. Friends pacing. Someone yelling at the keypad. Hours stuck outside a property they never had permission to enter. That weekend taught him something he'd never learned living with me. Access is not automatic. Silence is not consent. And don't be weird about it is not a contract. I didn't meet him through friends. There was no romantic setup, no shared history, no warning label. He answered a listing. 8 months earlier, I'd posted a simple ad looking for a roommate. My previous one had relocated for work, and the apartment, my apartment, was too big and too expensive to carry alone long term. He showed up on time. Clean clothes, easy smile. The kind of guy who knew exactly when to laugh and when to nod. He asked the right questions. Complimented the space without sounding like he was already mentally redecorating it. I'm pretty low maintenance, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. Work, gym, friends, I'm barely home. At the time, that sounded ideal. The first few months were fine. Not great, not terrible, just functional. We coexisted, paid bills, passed each other in the hallway with polite updates about packages and trash day. I told myself adulthood didn't need warmth to work. But little things started to shift. He stopped asking before inviting people over. Then he stopped mentioning it at all. Music louder than necessary. Strangers on the couch at midnight. Shoes kicked off like they belonged there. I learned to recognize the sound of the front door opening not by his footsteps, but by the chorus of voices behind him. When I brought it up, he laughed. Come on, he said once. You're acting like this is your place or something. It was, but I let it go. That became the pattern. I noticed, I adjusted, I absorbed. Somewhere along the line, he decided the apartment was a venue. His friends treated it like a place they could spill drinks, crash on furniture, leave trash behind without consequence. And then came that weekend. I'd gone to visit my parents. Just 2 nights. I left the apartment clean, locked, quiet. When I came back Sunday evening, I didn't even step all the way inside before I knew. The smell hit first. Alcohol, smoke, something sour. Red wine soaked into my couch cushions. Cigarette burns etched into the coffee table in a non-smoking building. Broken glass everywhere. Someone had vomited in my bathtub and apparently decided rinsing it was optional. My bedroom door was kicked in. The lock hung uselessly, splintered wood framing it like a bad joke. And my bed. I didn't want to think about my bed. Building security footage later showed him letting in over a dozen people Saturday night, smiling, holding the door open like a host. When I confronted him, he didn't even flinch. It was just a party, he said, shrugging. I'll Venmo you for the door. That was the moment I realized something important. He didn't see damage. He didn't see boundaries. He saw inconveniences, things women were supposed to smooth over quietly. I gave him 30 days' notice. He called me dramatic, told mutual acquaintances I was uptight, but he found a new place within 2 weeks and moved out midweek. No cleaning, no repairs, no apology. Just gone. So when his text came in the next day, casual, confident, entitled, it wasn't surprising. It was predictable, because people like him don't see consequences coming. They assume access is permanent. They assume silence means yes. They assume women will clean up after them forever. They're usually wrong. In the days after he left, he started testing the edges anyway. Not about the apartment, not about the damages, not even a fake apology wrapped in excuses. Just logistics. Hey, I think I left a hoodie there. I stared at the screen, the apartment still echoing from how empty it felt without his chaos. The broken door leaned against the wall, waiting for a repair estimate. The couch cushions were stacked in a corner like they'd been punished for trusting the wrong people. I didn't answer. An hour later, also my friend might have left a charger. Then a voice note. Then another text asking if he could swing by real quick. Each one carried the same assumption, that access didn't end just because he moved out. That my silence was temporary, negotiable. I told him I'd leave anything that belonged to him outside my door at a scheduled time. He reacted like I'd insulted him. Wow, you're really doing this. Didn't think you were the petty type. Petty. Not the friends who destroyed my home. Not the man who laughed about it. Me, for setting a boundary. Over the next few days, I started hearing what he was saying. The apartment was basically shared. I'd overreacted. I couldn't handle a little fun. And then there was the lake house. He'd never been subtle about it. The first time I mentioned it, months earlier, it was in passing. One of those conversations you don't think twice about. My family has a place a couple hours north, I'd said once, scrolling through my phone. Nothing fancy, just quiet. His eyes lit up immediately. A lake house? He asked. That's sick. I showed him a few photos. Dock at sunset. Water so still it looked fake. I made the mistake, one time, of bringing him and a few others up there for what I thought would be a calm weekend. No parties, no noise, just space. Or so I thought. What I didn't know then was that he was memorizing things. The gate, the routine, the fact that access codes existed. He never asked about permission. He never asked who actually owned it. Because in his world, proximity equaled entitlement. So when his text arrived about using the lake house, it wasn't bold in his mind. It was logical. He had decided. He had informed me. And he expected compliance. When the gate didn't open, when the code failed, reality finally pushed back. That's when his tone changed. Not confused, accusatory. What did you do? You need to fix this. This is on you. In that moment, sitting in a dark movie theater while my phone buzzed endlessly in my bag, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about a lake house. It was about control, and I had just taken it away. By the time I checked my phone again, it was almost 10 at night. I'd stepped out of the theater into the cool air, the noise of the parking lot grounding me back in my body. My phone was warm in my hand, like it had been working overtime without me. 52 missed calls. Texts from him. Texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails stacked so tightly they blurred together. The tone had shifted completely. There's no service out here. We can't just leave. You're being cruel. You owe us an explanation. One message stood out. It was from an unknown number. Hi, this is Jasmine. We're stuck at the gate and the code isn't working. Can you please send the new one? The assumption in that sentence was almost impressive. Not ask, not explain, just send. I didn't reply. I drove home slowly, windows down, letting the night air clear something heavy from my chest. When I finally set my phone on the counter, it vibrated again. Another call, another voicemail. I listened to one, just one. His voice was different now. Tight, pressed. You're taking this too far, he said. This is embarrassing. My friends are here. You're making me look stupid. I deleted it. The next morning, my uncle forwarded me the footage. The property management company had cameras at the gate, something I'd never even thought about before because I'd never needed to. The timestamp read Friday, 5:43 p.m. There he was. His SUV pulled up confidently, like the gate was a formality. Coolers packed in the back, trunks opening. People stretching their legs after a long drive they thought ended with a lake view and cold drinks. They tried the keypad once, then again. You could see the moment confusion crept in. Hands on hips, heads tilting, someone laughing like it was a glitch that would resolve itself. It didn't. One of the girls got out and started yelling at the keypad, like volume might intimidate it into cooperating. They sat there while the sun sank lower in the frame. At one point, two of them tried to climb the fence, an 8-foot metal fence with pointed tops. They made it about halfway up before giving up. 3 hours. 3 full hours stuck at a gate they never had permission to approach. By 9, they piled back into the SUV and drove away. The text didn't stop all weekend. Apparently, every hotel within driving distance was booked because of a local festival. They ended up driving back home that same night. Saturday morning, another message came through. From Jasmine again. You ruined my birthday weekend. We all took time off work. How could you be such an awful person? That was the first time I responded. I'm not sure what you're talking about, I wrote. He told me you were using my family's lake house, but I don't own any property. Maybe he was confused. The aftermath messages from him were something else. Threats, insults, demands for gas money, claims of emotional distress, and finally buried between the rage. Okay, I didn't technically have permission, but normal people share. That sentence said everything. In his world, ownership was optional. Boundaries were rude, and consequences were something other people dealt with. He still didn't realize what he'd started, but he was about to. I didn't feel triumphant. That's the part that surprised me. There was no rush, no spike of adrenaline, no moment where I sat back and thought, got him. What I felt instead was heavier, like the final click of a door closing behind me. I read his messages slowly, carefully, as if I were collecting evidence instead of emotions. One accused me of being vindictive. Another said I was heartless. Another insisted I owed him money. For gas. For the weekend. For the embarrassment of having to explain to his friends why nothing worked the way he promised it would. He never once mentioned the apartment. Not the broken door, not the wine-stained couch, not the cigarette burns, or the glass, or the bed. It was like that part of the story had already been erased in his mind, replaced by a narrative where he was the victim and I was the obstacle. I set my phone down and looked around my apartment. It was finally quiet. Not peaceful, yet, but quiet in the way a place feels after a storm has passed and left debris behind. Repairs were scheduled. Estimates sat neatly on the counter. I'd documented everything. That's when my phone rang again. My landlord. Apparently he'd called that morning. According to him, I had illegally evicted him, changed the locks while he was away, refused to let him retrieve personal belongings, violated tenant rights. I closed my eyes and took a breath before responding. Then I forwarded everything. The signed 30-day notice he'd acknowledged, photos of the apartment damage, security footage, timestamps showing him moving out midweek, screenshots of texts where he admitted he'd already left. My landlord didn't hesitate. Yeah, he said after a pause. He has no case. Then, almost as an aside, he's called a few times, each time with a different story. That's when I realized this wasn't over. It wasn't about the lake house anymore. It wasn't even about the apartment. It was about control slipping through his fingers and his desperation to grab it back. A few days later, I got a direct message on Instagram. A girl I didn't know. A profile full of gym selfies and motivational quotes. This is Brandy, the message began. I'm his new girlfriend. You need to pay for the emotional damage you caused. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so familiar. A new person handed a script, told to deliver lines he didn't want to say himself. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen, feeling that same calm settle in again. The kind that comes when you know you're standing on solid ground and someone else is about to sink themselves trying to pull you down. And then on Wednesday, he went public. He posted the video that morning. I didn't see it right away. I was at work, head down, trying to finish a task that required actual concentration, something he'd never understood the value of. My phone stayed face down on my desk until a coworker cleared her throat softly and said my name, like she was stepping onto thin ice. You okay? She asked. Because I think you should see this. The video opened with him sitting in his car, camera angled just right, red eyes, tight jaw. That practiced stillness people use when they want to look wounded but controlled. Text flashed across the screen in white block letters. When you escape a controlling ex-roommate. He talked for nearly 2 minutes, about how I was obsessed with rules, about how I hated his friends, about how I promised him access to a family lake house and then vindictively locked him out to punish him. He cried, just enough. He never mentioned the apartment damage, never mentioned moving out early, never mentioned the property wasn't mine to give. And then he did something careless. He showed screenshots. My message, have fun. His frantic follow-ups cropped. The context, gone. The comments filled fast. People calling me abusive, petty, controlling. Someone wrote that I had small energy. Another suggested I should be exposed. I closed the app and sat very still. I'd learned something important cleaning up his mess. Panic makes mistakes. Calm collects receipts. So I opened my camera roll. Photos of the destroyed apartment. Repair estimates. The signed notice. Messages where he admitted he didn't have permission to use the lake house. Then I went back to the video. I commented once. Just once. Screenshots, no insults, no captions. Receipts speak their own language. The video disappeared within the hour, but not before people saw it. Someone stitched his post with my screenshots and titled it, "Entitlement is a Disease." That video got more views than his ever had. The comments turned hard. By Thursday morning, his account was quiet. By Thursday afternoon, Brandy messaged again, angrier this time, threatening to come talk face to face. I replied with a single sentence. Any further contact will be considered harassment. Do not contact me again. The next morning, the property management company called. Someone had been phoning them all week, claiming to be different people. My sister, my partner, a business associate, each time trying to gain access. The last call claimed there was an emergency, that life-saving medication was inside the house. They had all the recordings. They asked if I wanted to pursue it. I said yes. And that's when the story stopped being about a weekend. The call ended, and for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel calm. I felt tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones, not from doing too much, but from being pulled into someone else's chaos over and over again. Fraud, impersonation, recorded calls. Those words echoed louder than any of his insults ever had. That night, an unknown number called. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was his mother. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask if it was a good time. She launched straight into it, her voice sharp with indignation disguised as concern. You need to be the bigger person, she said. He's sensitive. He doesn't understand boundaries the way you do. I closed my eyes. She went on about how he was a free spirit, how young people shared everything now, how I was being possessive, how if I hadn't overreacted about the apartment, he wouldn't have needed to blow off steam at the lake house. My hands were shaking, not violently, not dramatically, just enough to remind me this was real. I told her evenly that her son had destroyed my apartment, attempted to access property he had no rights to, and was now being investigated for fraud. There was a pause. Then she said, "Well, you didn't have to be so mean about it." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, but cleanly. I told her, quietly, that he might want to get a lawyer, and then I ended the call. Afterward, doubt crept in. Was it worth it? Should I have just let it go? Was peace more important than being right? But then I remembered the broken door, the smell in my apartment, the way he'd said, relax, like my space didn't matter. This wasn't darkness because I'd done something wrong. It was darkness because I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. And once you see the truth clearly, you don't get to unsee it. 2 days later, the papers arrived. Not dramatic, not ceremonial, just a thin envelope slid under my door like an afterthought. Small claims court. He was suing me for emotional distress, for breach of a verbal agreement, for lost wages, for travel expenses for 5 people, for defamation related to the video. Total damages $4,500. Apparently, have fun constituted a contract. I laughed once, out loud. A short, disbelieving sound that surprised me with how hollow it felt. Then I called my uncle. He didn't even let me finish before he said, "Send it to my lawyer." The lawyer called me back later that afternoon. He laughed too, longer, harder. "This is," he said, "the most unhinged filing I've seen in years." We prepared quietly, methodically. No social media, no back and forth. Printed texts, highlighted. Photos of the apartment damage. Repair invoices totaling $3,200. The signed notice. Screenshots of his posts. A letter from the property management company detailing the fraud attempts. Security footage timestamps from my building and the lake house gate. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a simple jacket and flat shoes. Nothing dramatic, nothing defensive. I wasn't there to perform. He arrived late, with Brandy and his mother. No lawyer. The judge looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from seeing the same story dressed up in different outfits. He spoke first, rambling, about how we had an understanding, about how I manipulated him by not telling him the code had changed, about how humiliating it was to be stuck at a gate in front of friends. The judge stopped him. "Did you have permission from the property owner to use the lake house?" He hesitated, tried to explain, tried to spin it. "So that's a no," the judge said. Then his mother stood up. She started shouting about harassment, discrimination, how I was controlling and vindictive. The judge warned her once. then twice. When it was my turn, I didn't rush. I laid everything out. Calm, chronological, factual. When the security footage of them trying to climb the fence played, someone in the gallery snorted. The judge didn't smile. He dismissed the case entirely, ordered him to pay $3,200 for the apartment damages, recommended the property management company pursue the fraud case, issued a warning about frivolous lawsuits. He lost control then, crying, shouting, saying it wasn't fair, that I'd set him up, that the judge was biased. Brandy stood up and walked out, just left. Security escorted him and his mother from the room while she yelled about appeals that didn't exist. I walked out into the daylight feeling lighter, not victorious, not smug, just finished. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time. I thought the courtroom would be the end of it. I was wrong. Consequences don't arrive all at once. They cascade. The first update came from the property management company. They were moving forward with the fraud investigation. Not a warning, not a slap on the wrist. Formal charges for attempted fraud and criminal impersonation. They had the recordings. Every call. Every version of his voice claiming to be someone else. In one call, he'd said he was entitled to the property because he paid rent to someone who had access. That line alone sealed it. I wasn't required to testify. The evidence spoke for itself. A week later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that his social media had gone private. The confident posts, the carefully cropped narratives, gone. What remained were whispers, friends distancing themselves, people asking questions, stories no longer lining up. Then came the texts from new numbers, alternating between rage and self-pity. You ruined my life. I never meant for it to go this far. You're heartless. Please just tell them to stop. I didn't reply. The building added his name to the do not allow list after I showed them the court ruling. My apartment was repaired, door replaced, furniture cleaned or replaced, silence restored. And then something unexpected happened. One of the friends from that gate weekend reached out. An apology. She explained she'd been told everything was arranged, that permission was given, that when they got stuck, he'd told them I was being petty about the apartment. After seeing the receipts, after realizing she'd been lied to, she was done. Apparently, she wasn't the only one. Money owed, stories unraveling, a friend group collapsing under the weight of truth. Brandy went quiet. Apparently, she'd posted something vague about dating crazy, then deleted it. Their relationship didn't last long. And then, almost poetically, another process server showed up. Not for me, for him. One of the friends from the birthday weekend was suing him for gas, hotel costs, and lost wages, expenses incurred based on promises that were never real. Another friend told me at least 2 others were filing similar claims. A pyramid of consequences, built entirely by his own hands. My uncle still sends me screenshots from the gate camera sometimes, captioned with things like, "Still the best entertainment I've had all year." I don't watch them anymore. I don't need to, because the fallout isn't loud. It's quiet, it's isolating, it's permanent, and it's his to live with. A week after everything settled, I went back to the apartment late one evening and stood in the doorway longer than I needed to. The door closed properly now. The lock clicked the way it was supposed to. The couch no longer smelled like someone else's recklessness. Peace didn't rush in. It arrived slowly, like a room learning how to breathe again. The fraud case was moving forward without me. He still hadn't paid the $3,200, but my lawyer assured me that wages could be garnished if necessary. His name was flagged everywhere it needed to be flagged. The systems he'd tried to manipulate were now watching him instead. I heard he was still telling his version of the story online, how he'd been targeted, how the system was unfair, how I'd been cold and calculating. I didn't correct him. People who live on borrowed narratives eventually run out of lenders. One afternoon, a message came through from the same friend who had apologized earlier. She told me their entire group had cut him off, that this wasn't the first time he'd lied about access to places, events, opportunities, that the lake house was just the first time someone checked. I thanked her and closed the conversation. That night, my uncle texted me a photo of the dock at sunset. "New code works," he wrote. I smiled. Here's what I learned, quietly, without speeches or slogans. No is a complete sentence. Access is not affection. Silence is not consent. And entitlement doesn't disappear when ignored. It escalates until it meets a boundary that doesn't move. I didn't ruin his weekend. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't set him up. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. And that was the moment my life became peaceful again. Thanks for staying with me through this story. If you've ever doubted whether holding your ground was worth it, let this be your reminder. Sometimes the calm you're looking for is waiting on the other side of a locked gate. And this time the code actually works.